So let's have a look at another important company in the semiconductor space, and ARM. So their story began back in the 1980s when a group of engineers at Acorn Computers, a British company, set out the design to basically design a new computer processor. They envisioned a processor architecture that was simple yet powerful and energy efficient. The vision led to the creation of the first ARM processor in 1985. So this was basically the first product on these kind of ideas based on those few engineers from Acorn Computers. But the same kind of people started the company. They founded the company officially in the 1990s. And this was a joint venture between Acorn Computers, Apple, and then VLSI Technologies. So the whole idea behind ARM's success was the adaptation of RISC. So RISC stands for Reduced Instruction Set Computing. And this is some difference between that and the more, let's say, general purpose complex instruction set computing, or CISC, and also an instruction set that I believe x86 is based on. And RISC processors, again, the new instruction set that ARM was going for when they started the company, is basically designed around the simple idea to execute fewer instructions, but do so quickly and efficiently. And this approach has made ARM, let's say, the ideal processor for mobile and embedded devices now, let's say, 25, 30 years later. And throughout the years, ARM has continued to innovate and released multiple kind of processor architectures that caters to different markets. The designs have evolved to meet ever-increasing demands of power efficiency and performance. You can see the ARM Cortex series, for instance, has become synonymous with high-performance mobile computing. And these kind of products that they offer has been basically the legs that all the Android phones and other kind of phones have been used for many, let's say, years and over a decade now. Now, jump forward to 2016, ARM was acquired by SoftBank Group, a Japanese, let's say, conglomerate. Sorry for the pronunciation, I cannot do that. Anyways, so it's a landmark deal worth over roughly 30 billion US dollar. And the acquisition was provided ARM with the resources and opportunities to further expand and influence the emerging technologies like IoT, Internet of Things, and AI, artificial intelligence. That was a bit of background of the company. Now, if we go into see basically what kind of solutions and services they offer. So we know that ARM is mainly built around the licensing fees from the likes of, let's say, Apple, Samsung, Qualcomm, Nvidia, and so on. And the licensing fee depends on the kind of complexity of each company that is basically purchasing the license. So these licenses are usually anywhere between 1 million US dollar to 10 million, maybe a bit more these days, let's say 1 to 20 million, because these numbers are a bit old now. And this is basically the lion's share of the solutions that they offer. And then they also have this other side of the business. So you have your licensing fees, and then they have their royalties per chip. So basically, if Samsung makes a new phone processor or system on chip based on ARM IP, then they get an amount of royalty that is associated with the number of chips that they sell during that a specific period of time. And this royalty is usually anywhere between 1 to 2% of the selling price of the chip. Now, this is quite easy, but in some instances, for example, like let's say Samsung, where they actually design and use their Exynos chips in-house in their own mobile phones and other like tablets, then it's a bit more difficult, but then they have basically a system of agreeing upon what the sales price of that chip would be on the general market. So still they would get roughly 1 to 2% of the selling price of the chip. So to summarize, we know that of the 100% amount of revenue that ARM usually has, roughly half of it is from licensing fees, and 1/3 of it is around royalties, and the rest of the earnings revenue comes from the software tools and technical supports that they offer to each of these companies like Apple, Samsung, Qualcomm that use their licensing, their IPs, intellectual property basically. And I haven't talked about the kind of licenses, but we know that ARM has multiple different of licensing, and the first one is basically an academic license where basically universities can use, and these are basically free. And yeah, the only caveat is that you can learn and use the system, but you are under no circumstances able to sell a product based on the academic license. Then they have this single-use license. So this is for basically for very small companies or small startups. And then the next step is a multi-use license. So it's for, let's say, a bit larger companies, and it can be used, I think, up to 3 years. And then each 3 years it has to be renewed. And then there are a bunch of different levels of ever so more increasing licenses. And at the end, you have the subscription license, which is for extremely large companies that wants to make new devices and projects without needing to basically get a specific license that could be up to 10, 20 million for each different project in the company. So let's say if you're Samsung and you have multiple different phones coming online within the next 3 years, you don't want to need your managers of each different project to apply for a separate 10 million license fee. So then they have this kind of subscription license. And then the last level is basically architecture level, I think, or something like that, which is basically companies like Apple, Qualcomm, and Marvel that are using that. And it's basically, you get almost free hand on what you can do with the IP, and you can even tweak and change it for your own use. But I guess these kind of licenses cost a whole lot more, as you can see in the image. And actually, Apple renewed their license with ARM recently, I think until something like 2040s. So yeah, the big companies are definitely still believing in the ARM instruction set. So now going into, let's say, the financials and the business opportunity. I guess the important thing here is the PC market. So your traditional computers and laptops going to transition more to ARM, as we have seen happening with Apple once they change from Intel's x86 based computer chips, CPUs, to now their own custom-made ARM chips like M1, M2, and soon M3. And you know that Apple is actually gaining market share in the laptop segment. So I think like this is somewhere that ARM will increase their business. You have started seeing Samsung with their new Galaxy Books offering ARM-based solutions, and I don't think their presence will decrease from here onwards, especially given what Apple has done to the market. You can see that the new Apple M1 laptops and M2 laptops have just they are so powerful in this small thin form factor, and they are so efficient. So the battery lives of those laptops are so much better than on equivalent x86 Macs and also Windows. So there's definitely incitament for companies to change to ARM in that regard. So on that sense, I'm quite confident with the company's next 5 to 10, 15 years. There's another threat coming for ARM, and it's RISC-V, which is a very like similar set of instruction sets, and also based on energy efficiency. And the only main difference, or the big main difference, is actually that ARM is you need to purchase a license from the company, whereas RISC-V is basically open source. Although you shouldn't mistake this for RISC-V being completely cost-free, there are still quite a lot of cost in if you adopting RISC-V, especially since that this is a newer instruction set, and there's other inherent cost in this new set of new instruction set, whereas ARM is such a, let's say, established company, and there is no hidden cost. You pay the license, and in most of the time you have all the tools you need. Whereas in the RISC-V, some of the tools are not there, so you have to invest in them yourself. And also, if you want to certify your product to be RISC-V compatible, although you don't need to do it, but if you want to do it, then and have the sticker on it, then yeah, you need to obviously certify this, and there is some cost to it. So again, there is not the RISC-V competition is not completely free, but compared to ARM, it's a cheaper solution for most companies. So we can see that the financials for 2022, they had a revenue of 2.68 billion US dollar, and of those revenue base, they made 524 million in net profit. And the year previous to that, in 2021, the revenue was at 2.7, so basically a stagnation through 21 and 22, and the net profit was 549 million. Again, almost in the same, basically same ballpark. So we see that there is absolutely a stagnation. But again, no, if you have watched my previous videos, you know that 2022 was an exceptional year for the semiconductor market. So at least in AMD's and Nvidia's case, that was like an outlier of a year. So maybe we shouldn't 2022 and 2021. So maybe we shouldn't like compare to those numbers. But again, there is at least some stagnation in my opinion. And we know that the sales has increased roughly 70% since SoftBank purchased the company back in 2016. And ARM is currently owning 99% of the mobile market share. This is your iPhones, your Samsungs, LGs, Sonys, Huawei, Xiaomi's, any like phone company is basically based on ARM. And they also have a significant share of the automotive market, which stands at roughly 41% right now. The only issue for me is that since they increased their revenue by 70% since 2016, we know that in 2016, 49% of the world owned a smartphone. Today, that number is 85%. So there is less room to grow that market and more competition coming in terms of if we ever gonna see any RISC-V competition in that sense. But even if we don't see any competition from RISC-V, I mean, if you have 85% of the market, if 85% of the world is using smartphones, there is really not that much more room to grow in that sense, in terms of population basis. And also on the bad side is that roughly 24.5% of ARM's royalty-based revenue is from China in 2022. So with that comes a geopolitical risk in that regard as well. And we know that the Chinese are really executing very well in the semiconductor industry, especially you've seen the latest rumors with Huawei and the 7-nanometer chip manufacturing basically without Western manufacturing companies. So it's a really diverse market for ARM in my sense. And going back to the financials again, we can see that the company is roughly selling at a price to sales ratio of close to 20x, which is expensive. And we know that the PE ratio is again 100%, roughly 100x, again very expensive, especially considering that there is some sort of stagnation from the last 24 months. But again, it's difficult to value this company because although 100x is quite a lot and 20 times sales is also a lot, we know that the gross margin is very good here, but the question is where will the future growth be to justify these numbers? And especially that the whole, I guess, whole thing boils down to, we know that they are really good in the smartphone market, but they need to grow their presence in automotive, AI, and data center. And all these, I guess, at the same time that their traditional markets are being threatened by RISC-V solutions. And RISC-V, as we said, offers similar energy efficiency in mobile applications, and in the long run will turn out to be less costly solution than ARM, simply because it's an open source solution. And we have seen recently that the big companies that, for example, Qualcomm, are definitely moving into the RISC-V space, and Qualcomm is one of the biggest companies that are using ARM. So it's one of the big customers for ARM, which is starting slowly to also adapt to RISC-V. We don't know the long-term implications of this, but Qualcomm is not the only company, and especially we see this movement in much more newer and smaller startup companies. So we know that also that Tenstorrent, the company of the Silicon Einstein Jim Keller, the new startup, is also using RISC-V, so there's definitely something going on there. Yeah, so to summarize, in my opinion, again, this is not investing advice, but on a personal note, I would not invest in ARM at this price. I think that it's quite a bit overvalued in a sense. Not completely overvalued, but I guess like it's not undervalued either, and it's kind of priced for perfection, not really, but almost, I would say. And in my opinion, there are better options out there. Now, it still doesn't mean that you shouldn't follow this company because, as you know, I mean, things can develop very quickly. And if the stock price goes down to, let's say, below 50 or even below 40, then yeah, maybe this is a really interesting company because they are still holding 99% of the market share in the mobile phone market, and that's really, really, I mean, high business margin, high gross margin business. So I would say that, for my opinion, there's better options out there like AMD, but yeah, if the price is right below, let's say 45 at least, then maybe you should consider it. So thank you for watching and see you in the next one.